I hope people will forgive me if I start by just saying a few things directly about the crisis in the Socialist Workers' Party, which is sort of consuming some of my time and thoughts, and I'm sure various people in the room will have been reading the internal bulletin and the debates around this. Before I offer some wider thoughts about radical organisation, so people keep coming up to me and they kind of ask me, like, "Oh, Tom, you've been at the centre of this. You know, what's it really about? You know, what's the hidden agenda? Like, what's your hidden agenda, Tom?" And you know, the answer is that there isn't one. God, these people are arriving anyway. The answer is that there isn't a hidden agenda. I mean, it really is about rape, the crisis in the Socialist Workers' Party. There's specifically the appalling treatment of a young woman who made an allegation of rape against the party's de facto leader, Martin Smith. And the various positions that people have taken since, you know, on feminism, the internet, I mean, these were existing issues that had been debated, albeit unsatisfactorily, you know, previously within the organisation, but they're being raised now as offshoots of that central issue. And I have to say that up until all of this came out, I mean, I thought of myself as a pretty loyal member of the SWP, you know, an organisation that I joined because I'm a socialist, because I'm a revolutionary, not because I thought it was ideal, I have to say, but because I thought it was broadly correct and quite effective with it. But by the end of that day, I had decided that, well, I witnessed that the leadership and a large part of the membership had gone rotten, and I started to try to figure out how that could have happened. And that's where I want to come on to what this meeting is actually about, which is how radicals should organise. And in those terms, I believe the central lesson of the SWP crisis is this. What does Martin Smith, or Comrade Delta, you know, have in common with Lord Reynard of the Liberal Democrats? What does he have in common with a Catholic cardinal? What does he have in common with Jimmy Savile? The answer is power, right? And that's what rape and sexual abuse are fundamentally about, is this question of power. Crucially, power in the sense that they felt protected by their organisations because of their perceived importance within them and the damage it could do to the institution if made public, giving a strong motive for a cover-up. And from that, I think you can draw wider conclusions. I mean, I think this might seem a bit of a jump, but I think we need to talk about Lenin, right, so to speak. Whatever you think of Leninism, and I know that there's people ain't necessarily, you know, but like it's the fundamental basis for most of these kind of 57 varieties of left group that you come across. And for a good reason, I would say, which is that we haven't got a lot of working models of revolution, but the Russian Revolution does provide one. And we can argue about what Lenin really did and thought, but the truth is that his mode of organisation actually, even under the conditions of the dictatorship of the Tsar in the run-up to 1917, you know, Lenin's method then was more democratic than most of the far lefts today in the liberal democratic conditions of capitalism in Britain in 2013. And that's worth saying. But I do think that by the same token, you know, the way that the practice of the revolutionaries in Russia under siege after 1917 was then generalised, you know, I think you can see this line of descent, this line of ancestry, where it's generalised into the world's communist parties, and from there to Trotskyists, and in that way contains, I think, many of the seeds of the left group's current authoritarian streaks. I think as generally practiced, and not just by the SWP, this idea of Leninist discipline usually ends up meaning a leadership who are the main, if not the only, source of initiative and of theory. And it tends to create this very clear hierarchy, whether that's formalised or whether it's informal, that can shade over into a very militaristic kind of leadership that comes not even by political argument, but simply by commands and orders. So you have a situation in Britain today in which, well, in the world, in which the left is divided into these sects, each one with its own particular leadership who somehow never seems to get replaced unless there's a split or something, you know, and each one thinking that it's in this very special position where it has its proud tradition and it, you know, is being always correct about all things. So this idea that we alone, you know, in the world, this group of however many hundred or thousand of us have the answers. And the trouble is that in your pursuit of this kind of revolutionary purity, you end up being cut off, I think, from reality. Not just speaking a different language, but thinking that you know better because you have this trans-historical, universal understanding that, you know, the poor, unfortunate, ordinary person doesn't. And in doing that, you systematically alienate people. These kind of interesting new methods of organisation and theoretical innovations thrown up by the movements pass you by. Your ideas become fixed, your slogans go stale, your writing ends up sounding as if it's addressed to a world that no longer exists, right? You can't make convincing arguments in contemporary debates because you don't understand what's being debated. And so the group becomes more insular and more self-referential. Do tell me when I've got like 1 minute left or something. Yeah. It substitutes its own initiatives for engaging with the real movement. The organisation's culture gradually dislocates itself entirely from wider society, and the leadership gets more powerful, even more powerful than it was to begin with. In fact, in the case of the SWP, this was done very deliberately to try to hold together an organisation in a world that was moving to the right under neoliberalism during the 1980s. And then one day it explodes. So, you know, it's not that we, the left, etc., weren't doing a bit badly before now. During all these years of capitalist crisis that we've seen, you know, all of the different groups on the left have failed to grow significantly, stagnating at best in what should be our moment of opportunity, if you ask me. But at the same time, you see that our ideas, these ideas that we stand for, are getting more popular. You just ask the person on the street what they think about the bankers or what they think about the 1%, right? But that isn't translating into organisation in the way that you would hope and that you would expect. And more recently, we fought these pitched battles over like which group it is that's going to get to declare themselves the leadership of the anti-austerity movement, when what we should have been doing is uniting against austerity and fanning the flames of that movement. Okay. Now, as I say, you know, the fight in the SWP isn't directly about all that, but it has brought it all home, and I think, you know, it shows us the awful end result of these kind of sectarian methods of organising that are so dominant on large parts of the left, and that's why I think we need to change. Yeah, so I'll sum up. Okay, so what should it look like, right? To finish, I'm just going to offer a few what I think should be watchwords, right, when talking about organisation, and I hope this can be a starting point for the discussion. I think democracy, and not just formal democracy in the sense that you have a leadership that makes all the decisions and then you have a conference that goes, yes, we agree with the wise leadership, right? But actual grassroots democracy in which we participate in the decision making. It doesn't sound all that hard, but you know, you don't come across, well, I don't come across it that often. Pluralism, another one, and by that I mean freedom of different tendencies, traditions, you know, debate, a bit of humility about our own traditions and how they have variously, you know, failed, and willingness to engage with people of all traditions and none. Learning, I think, is an important word. Right? Left organisation, I think, is always going to be a nonsense, or turn quite quickly into a nonsense, if it isn't based on the movement and the actual struggles of the working class. You know, we don't have all the answers, but to learn successfully, an organisation has to allow ideas and experiences to flow from the bottom up and not everything be imposed from the top down. And that could be how you build something that could be hospitable for a mass movement, for a mass membership, instead of constantly driving people away. Two more. Experimental, right? I think, you know, what we have isn't working. We don't know what is going to work. So the important thing to do in this situation is to experiment, to try different things, even if they seem to contradict one orthodoxy or another. And I think we need to be bold in that sense. And finally, I think we need to put oppression, it's the last of my words, you know, gender, importantly, but all forms of oppression, at the centre of our analysis, not just in words but in practice, you know, and not just seeing it as this kind of external problem to be fought in society, but as a constant danger within any organisation. If we just go around saying that oppression has to be subordinated to class, I mean, I'm sorry, but we will end up replicating it in our own organisations. And I'm fine, I don't think we should be afraid of the word feminism either. By the way, quite the opposite. Just because, to the vast majority of people, bloody hell, it means that you're against sexism and you're for equality for women. What are these people doing saying they're against feminism? It's incredible. Now, I mean, I don't claim to be the first to come up with any of this stuff, but I do think we're in a moment where this awful situation that we've found ourselves in is sparking a wider wave of rethinking of our methods of organisation on the left, and I do think that we have a chance to do something new and to do something different. So, I mean, of course we're not going to figure out everything here today, but I do look forward to hearing all of your thoughts about what it should look like.